Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you to those of you who are actually in the room. I'm honored to be here and to welcome you to the second panel. Over the course of the last few days, we've spent a lot of time talking about the various challenges for Christianity and for Christians in the Middle East. And we've talked about policies and the things that need to be done in order to improve and protect these communities. Today's panel and this current panel is slightly different. This panel focuses on the how. How is it done? How is policy changed through awareness and through advocacy? And what we have here assembled are 5 practitioners, people who are doers, who know how to take ideas and policies and put them into action. And so, because our time is short, we will go right into it. And so we're going to start with Thomas Farr, a retired diplomat and director of Religious Freedom Project at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This really is a change of pace for those of you who have been listening to some very heroic people. And I just want to begin by expressing a sense of humility at being in the presence of Christians who not only talk about persecution, but have actually experienced it. It's, as I say, humbling, and it's an honor to be here with all of you. Effective advocacy is based on an awareness of the facts. I spend my days thinking about issues that you think about, but also how to influence official American policy, in particular foreign policy. But I'd like to cast my remarks not only in those terms, but also in terms of the policy that the universal church might adopt. They're not obviously the same thing, thanks be to God. Government and church are not the same thing. But in some cases, the approach that they take to problems ought to at least have some overlap. So I think my remarks will reflect that. Our policy is to defend Christians, as well as other minorities who are under siege in the Middle East and elsewhere. The most immediate need, as I see it, and I should say that yesterday I was honored to testify before the House Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives on our American policy in Iraq and Syria. And so some of these remarks will reflect what I had to say to that committee. The most immediate need, obviously, is humanitarian. Food, water, shelter, and safety from the immediate threat. But the next step as a policy matter is to destroy or to isolate those who threaten Christians. In this particular case, we're speaking of a group that styles itself as the Islamic State. Now, as many of you know, last night, President Obama announced a campaign, a military campaign, which I personally welcome in this regard. But I have, as an American who, like all Americans, is free to criticize his administration, some concerns about issues that our president left unaddressed, and I would like, or underemphasized, and I would like to mention those now. One of them is Christians and the plight of Christians in the Middle East. He certainly mentioned this, but he did not focus on it, in my opinion, as he should have. Secondly, again, he mentioned this, but I believe did not give sufficient emphasis to it. We must do nothing in our legitimate attacks on those who are threatening Christians and other minorities in the Middle East. We must do nothing to give legitimacy to the brutal Assad regime, to Hezbollah, or to Iran, the sponsors. The United States is very late to the policy of criticizing these as well as the others that we are on the verge of attacking. It is my belief that while it is quite true that Christians in the Middle East have been safer under some of the despotic regimes that have existed in the Middle East, we cannot go back, even if we wish to. The answer to the plight of Christians over the long term is stable self-governance grounded in religious freedom. The third thing that I think the president failed completely to identify is the nature of the enemy we face in the Middle East. Here I speak of the United States as well as I understand the enemy that is being faced by our Christian brothers and sisters there. The enemy is not an insurgency or a group with an army or some other geopolitical entity that can be defeated entirely by military means. This is one of many outcroppings of Islamist terrorism. And Islamist terrorism, while one need not and I will not criticize the religion of Islam itself, to avoid naming the enemy is to avoid understanding how to defeat it. If we believe that we can defeat Islamist terrorism entirely by religious means, we are fooling ourselves because it is a religious ideology. One of the senior gentlemen who spoke on behalf of the administration in the hearing yesterday before the House said something like the following. He said, these are political actors who are expropriating a religion. I think this has it entirely backwards. These are religious actors who are exploiting politics. And this is a reflection of a misunderstanding of the enemy that will, I think, harm Christians over the long run and will certainly harm the national security interests of my own country. So what is it that you do to kill this ideology? And by the way, I want to be clear, nothing I personally am saying here is intended to be a replacement for military action, which I personally support. Pinpointed military action according to the rules of just war. I'm a Catholic who believes in that. But military action is necessary. Over the long run, though, Islamist terrorism, which I believe is an expropriation of Islam, I believe it is a distorted interpretation of Islam, the only people who can defeat this in the long run are Muslims. And Muslims must have religious freedom to do this. Today, if a Muslim steps forward to condemn what is going on, he can be charged with blasphemy. He can be charged with defamation of Islam. He can be charged with, in effect, heresy. Religious freedom is not a system that says anything goes. I can do anything I want because my religion tells me I can do it. Religious freedom imposes limits. And the key limit in this case is full equality under the law. So I will leave you with this. I have spent much of my adult life trying to advocate for this kind of religious freedom. My own government has basically ignored the fact that for 16 years it has had a statutory obligation to advance religious freedom. It is grossly misunderstood in the Middle East. I dare say it is misunderstood by some people in this room today. It is not designed to free people to kill others. It is not designed to sanction violence. It is designed to say that every human being, created by God, as everyone is, has the right and the obligation, as our founders in this country said, the duty to discover God. That's what religious freedom is, and that's what we should stand for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas Farr. I'd now like to introduce and bring to the podium Nermien Riad. She is the founder and executive director of Coptic Christian Orphans.
Thank you, Robert. Today we've heard, and yesterday and the day before, phrases such as beheadings, crucifixions, public stonings. It's really amazing that we're hearing these phrases in this day and age. And this is being faced with by the Christians of the Middle East. Many of us have family and friends there who are also suffering. And so as we sit here together, well, what is it that we can do? How can we defend the Christians? Well, in seeking some of these answers, maybe we can look back to the era of Christ and how he lived. because Christ too lived at a time of upheaval. There were mobs rallying, empires marching to war, and the expectation was that Christ, as the Messiah, would respond in kind. Yet instead of raising armies and conquering, he chose a different path. Rather than to go to war, Christ chose to heal, to educate, and to help the most vulnerable. So I submit to you that the Christian institutions in the Middle East are pursuing that same path. And I'd like to examine some of these institutions and how they are effective in an advocacy role. So thank you for lending your attention to my analysis, and I appreciate very much being invited to speak here at the In Defense of Christians Summit, in which we all have very high hopes. Of course, our hopes are tempered by an awareness that in the Middle East, persecution varies greatly. For while terrorists assault our communities in Syria and Iraq, in Egypt, public opinion has swayed against an Islamist government and has created an environment of more goodwill towards the Christians there. Lately, Egypt has seen some positive changes, from killings and church burnings to now these churches are being rebuilt. The government plans to reform the school curricula, and this may be an opportunity to show Christians in the proper light in the school textbooks. In fact, we've studied the dynamics for over the 25 years that Coptic Orphans has been working with Egypt's fatherless and other vulnerable children. And in those 25 years, we've worked with thousands of children, hundreds of communities, and we've kind of kept our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the street in the entire city. We've worked with officials at different levels, and we kind of understand advocacy, and we see a great opportunity. It's true that no two countries are alike, and Egypt may be counter to the trend. Nevertheless, we're praying that this Egyptian experience and this window of opportunity may be opened up to all our brothers and sisters in Christ there in the Middle East. But before I turn to the important role of advocacy, I want to just make a distinction about that term. We commonly think of it, advocacy, especially in Western democracies, as pressuring, advocating, or lobbying our elected representatives. And of course, there's a logic to that. But that advocacy that we define in the West rarely has an application in the Middle East. If we wish to advocate for Christians and other suffering minorities there, we have to approach it a bit differently. The key distinction I want to make is, rather than the targeting of political leaders, it's the advocacy that changes society's norms and shapes wide public opinions, and in the end, molds the future leaders. Christians in the Middle East have long engaged in this type of advocacy through three main channels: schools, hospitals, and non-governmental organizations, NGOs. And what's made our advocacy effective, what has given it the value in terms of preserving and strengthening Christianity in the Middle East, has been its determined focus on serving all people, not just Christians, all people, thereby truly following the example of Christ. So this even-handed approach to improving communities and individual lives has earned Christian social capital and established much-needed goodwill towards them in a region where over the centuries they have slowly become the minority. So let's look at these three and see how they affect tolerance and harmony there in that region. In terms of education, we can look no further than the Catholic schools in Egypt as an example. They serve both Christians and Muslims, and it's known that their graduates are among Egypt's most far-sighted citizens, most tolerant citizens. There's no better place to instill the value of love than among children growing up together. In our own Coptic church, similarly, they have these schools. And we invest in education for all because we know that without it, ignorance and suspicion will spread to the detriment of every minority community. So this pattern can be seen elsewhere in the Middle East, and the contribution of Christian schools and educators have been very powerful and valued. In short, education builds tolerance and social harmony. To advocate for Christian schools that serve the whole community is to advocate for a society where Christians can peacefully coexist with the majority. Let's look at hospitals. And when I refer to hospitals, I'm including all kinds of medical care that's being offered by the churches. These institutions have a very long and incredible history, and their mission is entirely in keeping with the behavior and teachings of Christ as a healer. So the question becomes, who's going to be the stronger champion of continued Christian existence in the Middle East? A parent whose child has been healed in a Christian hospital, or one who has not? In Egypt, whether operated by Catholics, Protestants, or Orthodox, such hospitals give immeasurable credibility to Christians. So the opportunity is this: consider each patient healed at a Christian hospital becoming a potential advocate for tolerance in the Middle East. Now consider their families, their friends. We could be speaking millions. So lastly, let's consider the NGOs. And I'm speaking of those NGOs that are openly Christian, because it's that visibility that can shape and alter public attitudes. Christian NGOs operate through an endearing Christ-centric philosophy. It's a philosophy that advocates love and forgiveness, and these are essential foundations for the rebuilding of the Middle East. Whether they're based locally or internationally, Christian NGOs affect the society with the humanitarian work that they do in the region's poorest, stress-ridden, and frankly, potentially volatile communities. We have actually an example here. The Holy Land Trust is an example of such NGO. Catholic Relief Services is also an example, and I would like to also turn your attention to the room across the hall has a display tables of various NGOs there. I would strongly recommend you stop by so that you could see their work, and bottom line, please support these people. Catholic Relief Services, they work hard to plant deep roots of Christian charity in the Middle East, and the services they provide, especially disaster relief, are critical. In fact, these NGOs are probably the best advocate in the sense that they're helping people when they are most vulnerable. What better time to change an attitude of a person except as they're being lifted to their feet? So in addition to these international and local NGOs, there's a new category coming out called the diaspora organizations. And these diaspora organizations created in the West for the sake of the homeland. From the West, they have the skills and talents and contacts in the West, coupled with the local knowledge and the trust they use for the homeland. These organizations are a wonderful mechanism by which the Christian diaspora can continue to be engaged and remain active there. So what comes to mind is, like, you must have heard of Sir Megdi Yaoub. He has a Heart Foundation which operates in Aswan, Egypt. Sir Megdi is often mentioned as what a Christian Egyptian who's living abroad can do for the homeland. So of the countless children saved from death, how many families must have emerged more accepting of all Egyptians? Taken together, these institutions are really grassroots catalysts of change, transforming every non-Christian person who encounters their services into a potential advocate. And in this time of incredible violence and persecution, it would be easy to dismiss the positive impact of these institutions. But what would the region look like without them? Imagine hundreds and thousands fewer people who've never had a Christian treat them or their children of an illness, or have never been exposed to Christian education, or received assistance from a Christian NGOs. Now count backwards from that year, and even this very difficult year of persecution, and imagine how many millions of Christians would have suffered even more had these institutions not existed. It's not too great of a leap to conceive of a Middle East where communities, Christian communities, have completely vanished because these schools, hospitals, and NGOs were not there to promote tolerance. Now let's look at the future. How many more millions of Christians will have greater security and better relations with their neighbors if we ensure that these schools, hospitals, and NGOs remain steadfast in their mission? Not even remain steadfast, but even expand and grow. While in some parts of the Middle East, the violence prohibits such an approach, in others, such as Egypt, there is that window of opportunity, and we must take advantage of that opportunity. One way to do that is to devote more resources to these efforts. Coptic Orphans, for example, is increasing the resources for its Valuable Girl project. This project creates a safe space for one-on-one mentoring for 400 Muslim and Christian girls in 7 sites in Egypt. This project basically follows the first rules of toppling the walls of distrust that separate the communities and keep us apart. And that's to bring people together so that they realize the humanity of the faceless other, of the nameless neighbor. We've heard from Muslim girls, why do they tell us you're bad? You're not bad. Or, this is the Egypt I dream of, where we are all together. In doing this work, we're following the wishes of His Holiness Pope Tawadros II, who told me that Egypt needs more grassroots village services like the Valuable Girl that nurtures tolerance and trust. He said, we have forgotten how to love one another. So I hear His Holiness's words in part as a call for Christians to continue doing what they're doing so well and for so many centuries through our schools and hospitals and other institutions. And I leave you with that call of action today. To sum up, if we're to be the best and strongest advocates for our brothers and sisters in Christ in the Middle East, what do? I submit to you that our shared mission is to keep our Christian schools and hospitals and NGOs running strong as a vital and irreplaceable force for good. Expanding such efforts would not only be smart politically in this very hostile landscape, it would also be true to how Christ lived in an era not like our own, with a lot of violence and upheaval. So let us continue Christ's example of healing and educating and helping the most vulnerable. It will be good for the Christians, it will be good for our neighbors, and it will be good for the homelands we so love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nermien Riad. I'd like to now introduce James Zogby, the founder of the Arab American Institute and commissioner of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Thank you, Robert. Let me begin by first noting that I'm speaking on my own behalf, and that if any of my comments are to be understood as being on behalf of anyone, it might be my Arab American Institute, but I do not speak in any way on behalf of the Commission in this particular setting. I actually want to start by thanking Tawfiq Batlini for having done a remarkable job in creating this forum. Remember the movie Build It and They'll Come? The notion that you create the forum, they come, and great things happen. Being here this morning as all of the patriarchs and the representatives of the patriarchs were speaking, I felt enormous pride in my heritage and my Christian faith. We are an ornery religion. We're different. We're not spiteful. We're not quick to anger. We're not vengeful. We are inclusive. We're forgiving. And we are understanding of the need to promote good for all, because that is what ultimately becomes good for us. I was moved by their words, inspired by their vision. I have been doing this work in Washington for way too many years now. And when posed the challenge, what do we do? How do we create awareness? I think back to when I first came, and I had a Palestinian priest from the Galilee, hosted him for a breakfast and invited a bunch of reporters who did religious reporting for the various wire services, which existed at one point, and newspapers. One of the reporters, after hearing the priest speak, said to him, "Now, you say you're an Arab and a Christian. That must be hard for you. When did your people convert?" He stopped and he said, "About 2,000 years ago." And the conversation went on, but I don't think made a dent. I was struck in the start of the Iraq War, tried to get a resolution passed, warning that if you make a war in a country whose history and culture and people you do not understand, you run the risk of setting forth dynamics that you can't control because you just don't understand. And I made specific reference to Christians, Chaldean, Assyrian communities in Iraq, to a blank stares. I remember in the very beginning when the Syria conflict was developing, and so the State Department was reaching out to groups of different sorts in the opposition, and I said, "Have you spoken to Christians?" They said, "Well, no, we met with this group and this group and that group." But I said, "But are there any Christians there? I mean, have you spoken to," this is discussions here in America, "have you spoken to Syrian American Christians?" Again, blank stare. The sense, and this doesn't mean, if you understand the role that Saddam or Bashar al-Assad played, it doesn't mean you tolerate dictators at all. It means that you have to understand at least the circumstances of the countries in which you're engaging. And so the importance of listening is critical. I mean, before you come and lecture to people, listen to them first. My mom used to tell me, if you want people to hear you, listen to them first, because then you might know what questions they're asking, the feelings they have, and you might actually be able to reach them a little bit. I mean, what happened last night, for example, is clearly a situation where somebody doesn't listen and therefore walks into a minefield and sets off explosions everywhere, maybe wanted to set off explosions everywhere, but the bottom line is, if you don't listen, you can't speak to people and have them understand you. Let me offer a couple of observations about what a message might be that we propose, given the understanding I derived from the patriarchs and their representatives this morning. The first is that this is about us, but it's not just about us. It's about the whole region. For Christians to be free, for Christians to be secure, for Christians to prosper, the entire region must be free and secure and prosper. We have to live in societies that in fact are open and free and provide opportunities for all their citizens. This cannot be about us and the hell with the rest. A sure recipe for disaster is if we defend Christians and ignore the contexts in which they live and operate. That leads me to a sort of a second point, in that this can't be about an anti-Islamic message. It can't be about a message that sort of echoes the themes of the Islamophobes. That might get you an applause in Washington. It doesn't help our people back in the Middle East, nor does it create the situation where we will help build societies like the one that Nermien is talking about, where people actually can work and thrive together as community of citizens in one country. My goal is not for Christians to be separate in Egypt. It's to be equal citizens of the country of Egypt, respected regardless of their religious background, just as we in America do not put it on the ID card Christian or Muslim or Shea or Sunni or Yazidi. We put American. That's all we are. I want Egyptians and Iraqis and Syrians and Lebanese to have the same sense of citizenship. I also think that we need to have a comprehensive vision, and part of that was on display here today. This can't just be about Copts or just about Chaldeans or just about Maronites. It is about, as I said, Christians everywhere, and it can't exclude one at the expense of others. It can't be that we don't talk about Christians in Palestine because it's politically uncomfortable. It's about Christians across the whole region. They all are part of our people and have to be understood. When the Pope went to Bethlehem, put his head against the wall and prayed, it sent a powerful message not only to Palestinian Christians that he was with them, but to Palestinians in general and to the region as a whole, that our faith is an inclusive faith. It's a faith that speaks for all, not just for ourselves. The challenges that we face are great. Americans still don't understand us. They still don't know who we are. They think that the way you talk to us is by, sort of pulling us out and segmenting our societies and saying, this is the message for Christians and the hell with the rest. That's not who we are. That's not the message we can project. That's not the way for us to make our people free and to make the region as a whole free. And so I think if we use the themes that were projected today by the patriarchs and by their representatives, we have a powerful message. The in defense of Christians is in defense of people across the region, to build a better future for themselves, for their children, of all faiths, in all societies. I cannot imagine an Egypt without Copts. I can't imagine a Lebanon without Maronites. I can't imagine a Palestine without its Christians. I can't imagine an Iraq without its Chaldeans and its Assyrians, or a Syria without all of them, Armenians included. They have been a leavening force that has built these societies. I do not want to pull them out. I do not want to segregate them. I do not want to eliminate them, because the elimination of these communities ultimately means it is to the detriment of the whole region. And so our defense of Christians is a defense of the whole region. It's a defense of the future of the region, of all of its peoples, and that should be our watchword. Some politicians won't get it. They won't understand it. They're too blinded by their own ideologies or by their own hawkishness or by their own bigotry to get it. We have to challenge them. We have to build a base among conservatives and progressives to understand the common humanity of all in the region and the need that they have to build themselves together or fall apart and perish. And so I leave you with that, and I look forward to the future of In Defense of Christians as an organization that continues to grow because it is so vitally necessary. Thank you.
Thank you to James Zogby. I'd like to now introduce and bring to the podium Sir Rateb Rabie. He's the founder and president of the Holy Land Christian Ecumenical Foundation.
I have two stories to tell you before I start as awareness and advocacy. When I came to this country in the 70s, somehow my parents sent me to Columbia, South Carolina to study English. And they assigned a host family for me, and they took me to church, to Baptist church. And they asked me, because this foreign student, what is he doing here? I said, where are you coming from? They told me. I said, I came from Jordan, because at that time I couldn't say I'm Palestinian. Said, Georgia? No, Jordan River. With the little English I knew and their southern accent, we had a problem. Kept saying Jordan because they cannot believe that Jordan, it could have Christians. And they told me that you are from Georgia. And I said, I accepted your citizenship. Just let's move on. Just excuse my southern accents for now, The second things, I have another story. After I finished my education, I went to Saudi Arabia. I applied my application for my residency. My name is Rateb Rabie. It's Arabic name, is not Christian name. Religion, I put Christian. Then I got my residency. Wow. Religion is Muslim. Why? Because they said, can't be you from Jordan and you are Christian. You should be a Muslim. Again, this is why we are talking about, education and awareness and how we can move on with that. That's where, as I'm maybe the only Palestinian representatives of Christians here in this conference, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a priest, I'm not a politician. I just felt I was a businessman, still practice business as my things for nonprofit. And started this 16 years ago because I seen a vision that Christians in the Holy Land needs help. I'm not talking Holy Land, Israel, Palestine, Jordan. I'm talking about Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Egypt. This is the Holy Land. But I thought we start with the Palestinian and move on to somewhere else. And I got the help from Lebanese and Syrian and Palestinian, plus the Americans. And I found out that was activism for me. But three years later, they said, I couldn't do it. I have to leave my business to commit to the Christians in the Holy Land. And since then, I've been full-time on this mission because this is a noble mission. Everyone has to involve in it. The Palestinian Christians has been oppressed since 1948. Their daily struggle for over 65 years include land confiscations, fragmentation of families, severe restriction of movement for clergy and worshippers. As a result of hardship and violence, many left. Now we have left with less than 1.5%, where we were about 20% at that time in 1948 and before. We have just left now 50,000 Christians in the Palestinian territories, about 150 in Israel. That's all what's left. We have 500,000 in Chile, have 200,000 in Honduras. We have them all over. And in order to carry on with that, I have to work with the American people who were not supporting the Christians there because of their ignorance. And we educated them. I'm talking from my experience for the last 16 years, where we gathered Protestant, Orthodox, Catholics together to come to help the Christians. And in order to do that, I have a few messages to start with to the patriarchs, bishops who came from the Middle East. they lit the fire under us for what they said today, yesterday, and the day before. As Arab Christians and other Middle Eastern Christians, I don't want to have any confusion, but because we are a fabric of the people in the Arab countries. For you, as Christian in diaspora from the larger Holy Land, we need to keep the fire burning. We cannot just quit now. They put the fire, we need to continue. And we have the experience how we can continue with that. We can approach the advocacy and outreach in two ways. Yes, we're going to work, or the politicians and the leaders, governments in the West will work on their governments. And we should let the people in the Middle East and the Arab countries to work on their governments to protect the Christians. But I believe that the second one, which all we can do, is grassroots. We have done it with the churches. We have thousands of people joined us because they found the truth. The American people, when you look at them and when they find the truth, they are really believers. They are really Christians. When they find the truth, they come forward. The problem, if you don't see it or you don't want to see it, this is where the problem is. Because we have to educate them about our presence in the Holy Land. How we can let them know that we are the first followers of Jesus Christ. If you look at Act 2:11-16, we were there. As Jim said, we are not converts. We are the original Christians. We are the holy people. In order to do that, you do advocacy here, and the bishops come, put us on fire. They put American on fire. They come from all over, and when they leave, nothing to do. That's why we have to start giving in something to do, as we did at HCF, the Holy Land Christian Ecumenical Foundation, that we have 20 programs you can involve, from education to housing to job creation, all of that, that's give them connection with the Holy Land. I have another message to the supporters of IDC. If you want to protect us, please do. Then protect us and help us, not based on political agenda or strength attached. We saw last night what happened when we mix power, your politics with your faith. Our important allies in order to protect our Christianity, the moderate Muslims. I went to college, and I have my roommate, a Syrian Muslim. He was praying with me. I mean, not with me. In the apartment we had 5 times a day. But he is the best supporter for Christians. If you educate the Muslims about our Christianity, you know what's all about, from love to understanding to forgiveness, you name it. They will become appreciative of our faith more than some of our Christians. I wish that our religious leaders from Jerusalem, the Palestinian, are here, because I felt I am out. I felt I am alone here without them, because they taught us the coexistence. They taught us how to have coexistence with the Muslims in the Palestinian territories in Israel. They taught us how to deal with the Jewish and how can we coexist together, because this is where everything starts from within the people. We are the Christians' bridge for peace, especially in our situation as Palestinian Christians, because we are in a land that we are the same people as the Palestinian at large, same language, aspiration, culture, you name it. At the same time, we are having in common with the Jews is the Old Testament. Then we understand both, and both they trust us. If we put them together, we can bring peace. But that will not happen without the Western Christians empower us to do such a things and play that role. And we cannot just wait for them to do it by themselves. Christians in the Middle East and Christian in the West has to work together toward the common good. I have a plea for all of you here in this room, because in the past 2 days, I never have heard the P word, Palestinian, Palestine, except this morning. I didn't hear it. I hope it is just because we have no P in our language. We don't like to hear our Palestinian. Then, if this is the reason, I'm happy that they didn't say Palestine. Because Palestinian Christians are part of you. We are with you. Please remember us. We are all together into that. I have a message for IDC. Thank you for putting together this outstanding summit, bringing together 1,200 people were here last night, giving a beacon of hope. They came to check out this new organization who's going to save them, who's going to help them, who's going to do all the work for them. And this is a huge responsibility. My thanks to Tawfiq and to Andrew for this initiative. And I renew my commitment to you that will help you from our experience with your mission, as long as it is based on our faith, because this is the best base we can work on, and through our resources, our network, and our people around the country and the world. In this way, we'll keep the light of hope burning. Let us all work together to replace despair with hope, fear with the human security, and humiliation with dignity. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Sir Rateb Rabie. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Nina Shea. She's the director of the Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute and former commissioner on the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom.
Thank you very much. Like you, I came to this conference because the Christians in Iraq and Syria are being so severely persecuted for their religious beliefs. They are being driven out en masse. They are facing cultural genocide by an implacable, evil jihadist group. There has been much talk about and much need for unity. Last night we were divided, and it was profoundly sad for me, and no doubt for many of you. Because I introduced Senator Cruz, I would like to take a minute and talk from the heart. I have defended against the religious persecution of Christians in Iraq, as well as Yazidis and Mandaeans for over a decade. And for 25 years of my career, I have defended against religious persecution for all people. We must stand united against the persecutions of other Christians, of Ahmadis and other Muslims, of Baha'is, Hindus, Buddhists, and Jews. Thank you. Everyone has the right to life and to religious freedom. It's inherent in human dignity. We may be divided over the territorial disputes between Israel and Palestine, but we are not here to resolve that. So I'd like to talk about what we are here to focus on, and that is the fate of Iraqi and Syrian Christians. 8 years ago, the United States had over 100,000 troops in Iraq. These troops were there to stabilize the country, and they did. But they did not help the Christians, the Yazidis, and the Mandaeans. During that period, many churches were bombed. Christians were taken hostage by the thousands. Many were assassinated and killed. 1 million Christians were driven out of Iraq during that period. I remember Donnie George, whom I had the honor to know, the former head of the Baghdad Museum. He lived in Dora neighborhood in Baghdad. He received a letter with a bullet in it. Maybe some of you did, or some of your relatives did as well. He left and died in exile. That is happening again in Iraq. At that time, 8 years ago, I went to the State Department and to the very highest levels and said, why aren't we have the troops there, why can't we protect the Christians of Dora? What are we doing? Why aren't we protecting the churches? I was told the United States is not sectarian. This, of course, happened at a time when we had overthrown a Sunni government and installed a Shiite one, and then we were talking to the Shiites about bringing the Sunnis back into government, much like what's happening today. Last night, President Obama committed to roll back ISIL. This will not necessarily help the Christians regain their former homes, their former countries. It is important that we speak up and that we speak with one voice. I'm just going to quickly, I know it's almost lunchtime, I'm just going to quickly itemize 5 things that are absolutely necessary to make sure the Christian voice is not lost once again. 1, there has to be good human rights documentation coming from Iraq and Syria. And Pascal Warda is a good friend of mine, and her Hammurabi group has done wonderful documentation, but she needs help. She needs help to, maybe through church networks, through civic networks, to get real-time information, detailed documentation, and particularly photos are so important. 2, we need a liaison to the US government. It's important that we have one office, one person that we can speak to as problems arise, someone with the time to have deep engagement in these issues. Congress has passed recently this summer, a couple of months ago, legislation to create a new post of a special envoy for religious minorities in the Middle East. That spot is vacant. It must be filled. We should unite around that, to have the president appoint someone with his ear, someone who is prominent and experienced to be in that position. 3, we must have a united voice about solutions. This should not stop with humanitarian aid. A pressing issue is where and how to resettle the Christians and the Yazidis in their country and with equal rights and full freedoms and full protection. 4, we must build coalitions. The Christians of the Middle East are simply not numerous enough to make a difference at this point within this country. We must build coalitions with other religious groups, and particularly and foremost with other Christian groups. And lastly, we must learn to work through Congress. Congress is important. You've had a start with that with this conference. Some of it went well, some of it didn't go so well. But Congress is important for the hearings, for the bully pulpit, for being able to shine the bright light of American democracy on the problems facing the Christians in these countries. Resolutions, appropriations, and oversight. It is not sectarian for the United States to stand up for persecuted Christians, Yazidis, and others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you for your participation today, and thank you to the distinguished panel. Please join me in thanking them for their remarks today. Thank you.